What size business should I buy? This is one of the most common questions that we get in Acquisition Lab. And the reason really is because when you're using leverage or debt in order to acquire a business, the amount of those dollars equals the amount of risk that you're taking on. So how do you take that variable in context with the other variables in order to make a decision? Check out Chelsea Wood, co-founder of Acquisition Lab, on this Acquiring Minds office hours, where she discusses the type of size of business you should buy, as well as answering a lot of Q&A from the guests.
Welcome, everyone, to this office hours on how big a business should you buy? My name is Will Smith. I am the host of the podcast Acquiring Minds. Today's session is with Chelsea Wood, a name many of you will recognize. Chelsea is the co-founder and managing director of Acquisition Lab. Acquisition Lab is a cohort-based education community for people serious about buying a business. Many lab graduates have appeared on Acquiring Minds, singing its praises. So we'll hear something about the lab a little bit later from Chelsea herself. But suffice it to say now that Chelsea has seen hundreds of would-be business buyers, searchers, pass through the lab, and the question of how big a business to buy is constant. So Chelsea is going to do today's presentation on exactly that question. Chelsea Wood, all yours.
All right, wonderful. All right, thank you everybody for joining today's webinar. So today's topic, like Will said, is a topic that gets asked to me like multiple times a day. And so I thought, what a better way to deliver the message to masses than to do a webinar for Acquiring Minds. And so the biggest thing, if you're thinking about buying a business, most of the time you devour podcasts and books and community kind of Facebook messages and Twitter, SMB Twitter. And universally, I feel like you're going to see the message of people saying, I should have bought bigger. Like when I'm buying a business, when you're buying a business, you should buy as big as you can. Go big, go home, right? Which I've been known to live by that motto, but I don't know that I recommend it to everyone, right? And so I want to talk a little bit about the size fallacy. There is no wrong answer, right? I don't know that go big or go home is the best advice, because I think it comes from a place of hindsight, which is a privilege, right? There's no telling if that person would have succeeded had they bought a bigger business. I think the sentiment is that it's the same amount of effort, no matter what size business you buy. It's the same kind of minutia, transferring things over and operations. And so they're basically suggesting that you should spend your energy on a bigger deal because it'll be bigger returns. However, a lot of folks will get on the phone with me and they'll say, I don't know if I should buy small and kind of mitigate my risk because it's new and just give me a chance to kind of get started in this, or if I should buy really big. And so I want to talk a little bit about the difference between execution risk and financial risk. They are both risky. And so it's up to you to decide what kind of risk you're comfortable with. On the left, I'm kind of talking about smaller deals, right? And those smaller deals are typically going to be owner operated. There's going to be a higher workload on the acquisition entrepreneur because there's typically less infrastructure, less employees. And so if you're buying like $1 million company, that $1 million that you're paying is kind of spread out over a few pieces of the company, right? So if you just think about risk distribution, there's just not a lot, right? One piece drops away and it's a significant exposure. And so in that scenario, there's less financial risk, but there's much more significant execution risk because the business is less mature typically. Even just if you look about the life cycle of a business, maybe it hasn't gotten to $1 million in revenue yet. It hasn't gone on the business life cycle curve to be able to have gotten to the place where it's less risky, right? That's execution risk, but low financial risk. If you flip to the other side and talk about a $5 million deal or $20 million deal, that's going to have significantly higher financial risk, but substantially less execution risk. And the reason it's less execution risk traditionally is because there's no more infrastructure in place. There's SOPs, and there's a lot of times there's some kind of management leadership in place. There's a bigger employee base to have that risk distributed across, right? The other thing is when you buy small, if you make a mistake, just the percentage of the business that mistake can represent is bigger, right? So it can have a much more catastrophic impact than in a bigger business. And so there's an increased tolerance for errors in bigger deals. And those businesses typically are further on the life cycle. So inherently, they're just less risky. However, they are extremely high financial risk, right? both of these risks in Chelsea's mind, granted, I'm an IO psychologist, so I'm always going to go towards more about the people side of like how we process information and things, but I think they're equal in the sense of some people are much more comfortable with execution risk and some people are much more comfortable with financial risk. You just need to figure out which one you are, right? Like if you're somebody that hates debt and debt stresses you out, when you lay your head on your pillow at night, how are you going to feel knowing that you owe $5 million personally guaranteed to the SBA, right? On top of the responsibility you've always felt about your job and having to support your family, but now you are also the owner of the business. And so now you're responsible for the lives of your employees as well as your customers. And so the stress can be a lot bigger. And so in order to buy a company and do this really well, I think, and so does Walker, that you need to be very mindful about the stress factor, right? Like you don't want to stack risk by doing a bunch of things that are going to make this an unbearable experience for you. I've heard a story of somebody that really didn't realize how stressful debt was to them. And it actually led to a heart attack years later, right? Like that constant stress of being under debt. Some people don't care, right? And that's okay. If that's you, go big, right? But if that is you, you don't want to put yourself in a situation where both the business is a tumultuous place, right? Because the first 6 months is typically pretty stressful, up to like the first 18 months, right? And then on top of it, to put your personal life in stress as well, by adding this like personal factor of like the fact that you don't love debt. And so when you think
Chelsea,
about
can
what,
I hop in with a real quick question?
yeah, please.
We hear often, not often, but you'll hear people who bought small say, I now that I got my arms around the business, I think I could have gone bigger. Maybe if I could have, I should have gone bigger. Do you ever see, aside from our heart attack example, do you ever see people who buy big and say, I should have bought smaller?
Yeah, but those are typically situations where it doesn't go well, right? And so it's more, again, it's more about the financial risk, right? They're
Yeah.
facing the significant financial risk of it not going well.
Okay.
And so again, I think it's all hindsight though, right? And so I think you just get started with wherever your comfort level is. It's kind of how we make decisions, right? We all make decisions the best we can with the information we have at that time. This goes the same. Like if I could help people remove all of the exterior noise from the decision-making process when it comes to deals, I think we would have a much higher likelihood of like full success across the board. So the first thing that you want to think about when you're trying to figure out what size business to buy is what can I afford, right? And so the first piece is how much capital are you or some other, people contributing, whether you have investors or, somebody else that's chipping in capital. And then the second piece that I feel like nobody seems to talk about is how much post-close liquidity is required, right? And then the last piece is, are you trying to replace an income? So like how much money do you need in order for this to sustain the standard of living that you're comfortable with? Or are you, trying to pay an operator? And so we are going to kind of dive into these components. The first thing I want to talk about is the capital requirements, right? So there's two. I'm simplifying this for the sake of this conversation, but there's two approaches you can take, right? There's traditional bank financing and alternative financing, and there's SBA financing. With traditional financing, it's largely capped by the amount of assets that you're willing to collateralize. And so a lot of times in these situations, the business won't have enough collateral, like enough assets to actually pledge as collateral. And so you want to, in those situations, you almost have to do SBA financing, right? Because SBA financing doesn't rely on the assets. It relies on the historical cash flow of the business. And so if you want to do traditional bank financing, then you want to have typically 20% down and you want to be comfortable pledging assets. The assets could be your own or the business. So manufacturing is one area where you'll see asset-based lending being possible. It's actually like the example that Walker gives in his book, where he talks about the printing company. So the reason he bought it is because he could pledge the hard asset company as collateral and do alternative financing. And if you're using the SBA, it's a lower down payment, right? So I tell our members to plan for 10 to 20% down, but know that that can be split between you and the seller. Most lenders are going to require a 5% from the buyer, but I have recently found a couple lenders that are willing to do 2.5% from the buyer, and then the remaining 7.5 or whatever 17.5% that's required can come from the seller, as long as it's on standby for 2 years. And then I also think it's important for you to realize that as the deal size increases, sometimes the bank will require the down payment to increase as well. So you may have to put 10% down, but you might need the seller to put 10 or 15% down if you're doing like a $5 or $10 million deal. The regulations that came out in November, everyone's pretty aware of them by now, but they really did bring creativity to financing for folks. It's why you're starting to see the minimum drop for what the lenders are requiring, because seller financing has always been allowed to be part of your down payment, but it had to be on full standby for 10 years. And so the likelihood of sellers agreeing to it was a lot less back then, whereas it's becoming a lot more common now because it only has to be 2 years of standby. You can't do balloon payments though, and it has to amortize fully. But it does allow you to be a lot more creative. And you can do partial buyouts now, whereas you couldn't do that before either. So these are just very, very oversimplified guidelines, but I wanted to provide them as we move into thinking about how you want to think about cash flow when you're looking at leverage, right? And so have all of these things that we talk about these with your lenders when you're vetting them. One of the things that I mentioned was post-close liquidity. So the reason our acceptance rate is so low in the lab is because I run through what I'm about to do with you guys on every strategy call that I conduct. It's also why we don't do sales calls, why I still do strategy calls with people, because I don't want to take people's money if they can't actually achieve what they're trying to achieve, and a lot of people can't, right? And one of the pieces that no one seems to talk about is this post-close liquidity requirement. Ways that banks will try to work with this, but I feel like sometimes people need to ask themselves if it's in their best interest to get creative with this requirement. Post-close liquidity basically is the amount of money you have access to after closing. And that amount, so if you have, say, $200,000 to put into this, and that's all the money you have, the bank's not going to let you use all the money you have, right? They want to make sure that you have a cushion or a safety net. And so that number that they want will vary by how capital intensive the business is. And so a business that's like super capital intensive, figure like a product based business that's cyclical and you're like moving into a high period where you're going to have to buy a bunch of inventory, they might want 13% post-close liquidity. And that's of the total loan cost. Or if you're buying a service-based business with like no overhead, it might be 5% down. So I always tell our members to plan for 8% post-close liquidity being required, just for forecasting and modeling purposes.
Chelsea, can I quick
No.
question?
No, absolutely not. Yeah, what do you need?
So let's use your rule of thumb, 8% to be clear of the purchase price. So if I'm buying $1 million business, 8%, $80,000, I should just set aside, not to touch, and not even necessarily that I'm going to use it in the business, but just cushion, rainy day, safety net, kind of capital. And how it, go ahead.
It doesn't have to, I just want to clarify, it does not have to be cash though, right? It just can't be illiquid assets.
Okay. So like what are we doing?
Like restricted stock. Like you can't use restricted stock, right? Because you can't liquidate it fast enough in the event that you need it. Think about this as the bank wants to make sure that if things go sideways, so you have money to pay them with if the business can't pay your loans. Yeah. And so you just need to be able to access it quickly. But it doesn't have to be cash, just to be clear.
Okay. But so it could be stock portfolio, for example.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. And then how is that different, having my personal assets on the side, post liquidity? How is that different from getting a big line of credit from the bank worked into my SBA loan, or a lot of working capital on the balance sheet? Because those are the free cash. Both of those represent free cash that I'll be using when I get into the business. Why is holding on to some personal assets different, or is it?
So some banks are willing to consider working capital as part of your post-close liquidity requirement. Some are, some aren't. So again, these are things that you need to talk to your lender about. I think the reason is because I'm trying to censor myself since it's an office hours. My lab members are used to my mouth, but so
let it fly, Chelsea.
this is like your oh shit box, right? Like where you go if things don't go right. Your working capital should be a prediction of how much capital you need to operate with. Like you don't want to tap into that if you need your oh shit fund, right? And so you really do want to have separate resources so that you're not hurting one by taking from it, right? Like you would be potentially impacting operations if you had to take money out of your working capital, because your working capital is a projection of how much capital is necessary for, a standard operating cycle. So like 90 days in most businesses. I do think that everyone and their mother should take out lines of credit on everything possible when you're trying to buy a business now, because it's really hard to get access to that after you close because you're so heavily levered. And so there's a little friendly tip. The banks can ask you to close them though. And don't go buy Lamborghinis and stuff on them. Just have open lines of credit with nothing on them before you close, so that if you are ever in need of cash, you can go get it. Because the number one reason businesses fail in general is cash flow challenges, right? And so the same applies to businesses and acquisition. And so just giving yourself access is really a smart move. Okay, so the first thing, the biggest thing, the most critical thing, if you take nothing else away from me today, is like you need to understand if the earnings you're acquiring will produce is enough to support what you're trying to achieve. And so ask yourself, will it produce enough earnings to support my objectives? So let's just do a quick level setting on what earnings are. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but there's a lot of misinformation. People will accidentally use terms incorrectly. And so it's really important that you guys as buyers understand what you're looking at more than what it's being called. And so SDE is net income plus interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, anything that's non-income related as far as, or non-operating related as far as expenses go, or income, and then also the entirety of the owner's compensation and benefits. One owner. It can't be, well, that's nuanced. We can get into that. The second piece is net income. So that's the line item on your financial statements. That's revenue minus COGS and expenses and depreciation, amortization, interest, taxes. And then EBITDA is net income plus interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization back in, right? So that's telling you what your earnings were before those things. And then adjusted EBITDA is actually, in my opinion, the best metric there is. And I don't understand why we don't use it as an industry, but whatever, we all use seller discretionary earnings. But EBITDA or adjusted EBITDA is likely just going to be EBITDA plus the market rate owner of the market rate compensation of the owner. The reason I like this is because it's more representative of the actual like cash flow of the business as the owner. Whereas I feel like seller discretionary earnings can sometimes get real inflated for valuation purposes and not be actually representative of your cash flow sometimes. And so adjusted EBITDA a lot of times will be like, it'll be operating expenses all stands normal. And then let's say the owner was paying themselves 400 grand, but market rate's 120, then you'll see them adjust for the difference. But that adjusted EBITDA number is just a solid representation for a searcher of what the actual operating cost is. So anyway, these are the basic metrics around earnings. The one that you're going to see in this space most often for valuation and multiple purposes is SDE. As deals get larger, a lot of times they'll use EBITDA, or if a broker comes over from larger deals, they'll use EBITDA. And sometimes they'll call it EBITDA and it's actually SDE. So again, know the definitions so that when you're looking at it, you know what you're looking at, because the multiples are different, right? And so it can get really confusing if you're looking at something that you think is one thing and it's something different. Mm-hmm. In a nutshell, what I would love everyone to understand is that earnings does not equal your take-home income. So often I get on calls, and I've talked to thousands of searchers at this point, right? We're in year 5 of the lab. I selected the first like 750 members of the lab myself. And so if you think about that, plus everyone that didn't get in, this is the biggest challenge I think that people have, is not understanding or not thinking about all of the things that earnings has to pay for. So when they're like, okay, well, I have to replace an income of 200,000, so I'm targeting 250,000 of earnings. That won't work. And let's talk about why. So earnings actually needs to cover 3 things. The first thing is how to rebuild your operating cash if you want to, right? Because working capital goes far faster than anyone expects. And so you want to start building your cash reserves back up as fast as you can. But that also might include things like you need to pay for health insurance because you're transitioning out of a W-2 and you need to provide health insurance for your family. or maybe you still want to retire, or you still want to contribute to your retirement. So you need to account for those numbers somewhere. And so that's part of the operations bucket. The second that I also feel like a lot of people forget about, which is surprising to me, is growth. So all of these great ideas about how you're going to grow the company has to get paid by something. And so you need to account for your growth strategies right away. And then the third thing is what you can pay yourself to maintain your standard of living, right? Or pay an operator. And so earnings equals these three things, right? And that's not counting debt service, right? So earnings equals, I should have debt service there actually. What's left after debt service has to cover these three things, right? So let's talk about that as like actual practical examples. I just pulled a listing off the internet so that I could work with some numbers. But in this scenario, the target statement for the buyer is they're looking for something, a B2B service-based business searching for like 250 to 500,000 in SDE. And they're going to focus on marketing and efficiency. And they're going to do a 90-10 leverage split. So when you're looking at this and trying to figure out what will I actually make from the business, if I buy $450,000 of SDE, the rule of thumb when you're reviewing deals is cut that number in half always. It could actually be more than that, depending on your leverage, depending on your leverage ratio, depending on the multiple you're paying, the interest rates, but always assume it's half. And I've seen it as high as 60%. And recently with this whole like 2.5% down, I've seen it be even higher than that, right? So you have to be very careful to actually calculate debt service. And so then with the remaining number, you're going to divide that into those three categories. So funding your growth strategies, paying yourself, and then building up your operating cushion. So in this scenario, I financed 1.6. So they asked 1.5. I added 100,000 for working capital. And so that makes the monthly payment 22,000. And so let's do the math here. Okay. And so in this scenario, I acquired $450,000 worth of SDE. I funded 1.6 million. So my debt service is 264,480. I set aside $100,000 in growth strategies. So I want to put $40,000 to increase ad spend. I want to put some CRMs in place and some customer solutions. And then I want to do 50,000 to hire a sales rep. That leaves $85,000. I need to replace an income of $100,000. That doesn't work, right? That's not enough to implement my growth strategies and pay myself and have any operating cushion at all. And so for this scenario, the thing to remember is these are high cost growth strategies they're focusing on. It's added staff, it's doing ads, tech solutions, right? Like those are high cost growth strategies. And so you have to buy more SDE to execute on high cost growth strategies. And so in this example, the most common income that I hear that people need to replace is 200 grand. And so a lot of times they'll tell me their targets between 250 and 500,000. In this scenario, for the case of being interesting, to be honest, I made them focus on operational efficiency just because I thought it was interesting. If you buy a business making 250 in SDE, again, I added 100,000 in working capital. And so it's 92,000 left over after debt service, right? So that took over half of that earnings. And so leaving 92,000, let's say in an absolute best case scenario, this person added $20,000 because of operational efficiency improvements, and they want to have $30,000 for operating cushion, they would only have $82,000 to pay themselves with. So obviously that's not enough, right? So in this scenario, you would want to target or less cost growth strategies, right? Because then you can have less SDE. So in this scenario, I did 450,000 of SDE, which is still, in Chelsea's opinion, on the low end in order to be able to achieve your goals. But let's run through the math, right? So let's say you target 450,000. It's 264,000 in debt service, 20,000 in growth strategies. You have 205,000 left over. You pay yourself 200,000. You only have 500 or 5,000 in operating cushion for taxes and other things. That's still too tight. Right. And so the rule of thumb that I use on calls and with members is when you're thinking about this, again, and it all depends, but like just for a strategy, if you want to pay yourself a certain amount, you need at least 3 times that amount in earnings if you have low cost growth strategies. If you have high cost growth strategies, you need a minimum of like 4 times that amount to be able to fund those growth strategies. The other common example that I hear is that I want to hire an operator. And so in this scenario, I went with somebody that is, between 400 and 500,000 in SDE. they're doing the 90-10 split. They want to hire an operator so that they can continue working their W-2 because it feels like that is a way to mitigate the risk. I'm not going to get into how I don't agree with that. But for the sake of just running the math, because that's all I want to do on this webinar, you will have 166,000 left over after debt service. And in this scenario, if you wanted to add a salesperson, that's 60 grand. Then 100,000 to pay your operator, you'd have 6,000 left over, which means you're not paying yourself anything, nor do you have enough to build your cash back up. And so you could maybe get away with paying an operator 80 grand. But I just the reason I threw this one in here isn't necessarily as much for the numbers. I mean, you see that this doesn't really work, but like some people that are kind of stubborn will say like, oh, that's fine, it's fine. But I want you to be really careful not to stack too much risk on top of something that's already really risky. Like buying a business is extremely risky, and it's extremely risky when you're doing it using debt. And so to buy a business and have an operator take over from day one while you go and work a different job, while you're signing a personal guaranteed note, is a level of risk that only you can decide if you're comfortable with. But in the lab, I don't want I want them to mitigate the risks as much as humanly possible. Right. And so I would advise against this approach if it was a lab member every time.
Can I, a quick hop in? You mentioned rule of thumb, SDE divided in half for what's left over after debt service. Maybe you already said this, but in all of these examples, the debt service is not only 50, it's quite a bit more than 50%. Like in this case, it's a lot more than 50%. Is that, maybe later we can revisit the debt slide that you had where you calculated the debt, but is that, I assume that's high interest rates?
Correct.
Yeah.
Or in this scenario, it's also a higher multiple, right? So it's a little over a 3 from this. I don't want to do the math right away, but like you can tell it's, more than a 3 because it should be 500 to be 1,500 or 1.5 million. And so anytime you go above a 3 multiple, it's going to go above 50. And
I did not know that rule of thumb. That's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I kind of breezed over it on the slide that I had it kind of spelled out on, but anytime your multiple goes above a 3 or your leverage ratio goes up, right? So if your leverage, and this is under a 90% leverage rule, which is what everybody always wants to do, right? Even if you do an 80-20, right, where you and the seller are taking 10, it doesn't make that much of a difference. And so you really want to make sure you're running the numbers specifically on debt service. But the interest rate is also, impactful, right? Like back when it was 6%, it was like 46% of earnings. Whereas now, like it's not uncommon for it to be, 58, 62. And it will grow. Like I had a gentleman apply to the lab last week, or maybe it was this week. I don't know. It's all blurring together at this point. But he wants to do the 2.5% down. And when I was showing him the impact of that on the debt service, it's like you're literally buying a business to pay off the debt when you're financing it that much, right? And so it sounds really good, but then you have to balance whether or not the debt is worth the risk, right? Like what are you sacrificing to have a debt ratio that high? And so it's all about it's all a balancing act, right? Okay, so the most common version here is the $200,000 income, right? And so in this scenario, I had the person look for a $700,000 SDE, right? Which is a little more than 3 because they have a sales and digital marketing background, which is going to be a higher cost growth strategy. So in this scenario, they're looking for 700,000, right? Which is a little over 3 times what they want to pay themselves. And so they have 336,000 after debt. That leaves them 100,000 for growth strategies, 200,000 to pay themselves, and 36,000 in the operational cushion bucket. So you can see how this math feels more logical and like quote unquote safer, right? Because you're not squeezing things to make it work. In this scenario, they would need 210,000 for a down payment, but that could be split, right, between the seller and the buyer and whatever terms they agree to. So here you go. I didn't breeze over it. I put it at the end. It's important to remember that as the leverage or the multiple increases, the economics of this model can break. So just because you can pay a 5x for a business doesn't mean you should, or just because you can finance it at 97.5% of the deal doesn't mean you should, right? Same thing goes for when banks will say like, sure, I'll back this deal. But 4 other ones said no, you should go with the 4 that said no, right? Because just because they can doesn't mean they should. So in summary, the first thing that you want to ask yourself when you're trying to figure out what can I afford is how much capital are you or others willing to contribute? You want to plan for at least 10 to 20% of the purchase price. Even if you don't want to put that money down, it allows you to have that cushion for that post-close liquidity that we talked about. The other pieces, are you trying to replace an income or pay an operator? Because your income is always going to be significantly less than 50% of the SDE amount. And then the last piece is how much post-close liquidity are you going to need? Plan for 8%, but it'll vary from 3 to 15% based on the business. Will it produce enough earnings to support my objectives? So these are your objectives. I feel silly because I forgot to put debt service in here, and it really should be in here. But earnings needs to cover not just debt service, but operations growth and income combined. And then the last slide I put in here, honestly, because I just knew you guys were going to ask, because every time I do these sessions, these questions get asked. So I wanted it in print for you because I did plan on giving you the slides. So there's going to be, this is rough estimate, guys. Don't come at me if it's not accurate based on some quote you got, but based on the teams that we work with, you can do post LOI fees for financial due diligence. If you do light financial due diligence, it's like 6 to 15,000. But keep in mind, you get what you pay for, right? So that's like spot checking. That's not a deep analysis of the organizational health, right? That's a quality of earnings report. And you're going to do like 20 to 25,000 for that.
So Chelsea, the light financial DD and the quality of earnings, it's either or. I choose
Correct. Correct. And I will be honest, most people in this space go light financial due diligence. And I do think that can be a mistake in many situations. There are some deals where you can get away with light financial due diligence because it's a pretty simple business. But most businesses can benefit, or I should say most buyers can benefit from getting a quality of earnings report because they see so much beyond just the income statements and the balance sheets. Like they do a full analysis with projections of things you need to be careful of. And it's just a much more robust perspective on the financial health of the business. I am so passionate about the topic that I negotiated a significantly discounted package for quality of earnings for our members because I'm trying so hard to encourage people to do a full quality of earnings because so many times people will be upset about things that got missed in due diligence. And when I say, well, how much did you pay? It's like $600, $6,000. I'm like, well, you can't really be mad, right? When people miss things because you didn't go for a full due diligence, right? You played it safe or you played it cost effective and you went cheaply, which is fine. Everybody can do whatever the hell they want. You're all adults. But I do think that there's value in a quality of earnings in most situations. The other piece is legal due diligence. Again, this will vary significantly based on the lawyer you're working with, but most in this space will do flat rates packaging based on deal size. And so plan for 5 to 20,000 if it's an asset sale. I said 5 because I'm talking like super small deal, right? But like I would plan for 20 if you're doing like a standard $1 million to $5 million deal, right? Like, and then substantially more than 20. I didn't even know what to estimate here. I was going to put 35,000, but I didn't want you guys to come at me. Stock sales are really expensive because you want them to do extensive due diligence from a liability perspective. So it's a substantially more in-depth service. And the other thing I wanted to note is that some will allow payment at closing, but not many. I only have one in our, maybe 2 in our network that allow that. So those are post LOI costs that you're going to be paying out of pocket. The fees that are rolled into your loan at closing, which is a lot of times why that loan amount was higher, right, than the purchase price. Your closing costs get rolled in, working capital can get rolled in. Your guarantee fee is in there. There's a calculator on the SBA website, but they changed it this year and it's super technical now. And I've been in M&A for, good Lord, 13 years. And it's overwhelming for me to look at. And I was an analyst for many years. So I don't love it. So I just included the fees if you want to just calculate them yourself without using the calculator. But they're 3.5% on the first million and then 3.75% of the rest. And it's only on the guaranteed portion of your loan, not the loan amount.
Which is
and I
75%, 80%, 75%.
75%, I believe. And then currently waived under $1 million. So right now they have like a program where if you're buying something under $1 million, I'm pretty sure the guarantee fees waived. For modeling purposes, guys, I estimate closing costs and guarantee fees to just equal whatever your down payment would have been. I didn't want to give a rate because it really does, closing costs vary significantly based on deal size. And so when I'm telling our members to do it, I just tell them not to subtract their down payment from the purchase price and just to model the purchase price as full. The other thing I wanted to note is that your professional fees can be paid that are paid prior can be included in your loan and rolled in and like given back to you to build up your cash, to build your cash back up if you tell your lender in advance. Like a lot of lab members will do that if they acquire within like the first 18 months of joining, because it can help you build your cash back up.
Wait. So those big legal fees, equality of earnings, that can be rolled in.
Yeah. And so they'll roll it back in so that you can get that cash back. And it's I was just explaining to somebody in the lab how this works, but it's a little technical on how it works. But yes, basically it becomes part of your closing process, and you'll end up retaining that cash. And so you'll have more cash than you might have planned if you can tell your lenders in advance, and you'll have to provide invoices, right? Showing payment.
So other than my down payment, I can get away with no cash outlay for the duration of my search, because all the quality of earnings, legal, et cetera, if I'm careful and ahead of the curve, I can get that rolled in. So in theory, I could get away with just doing my down payment is the only cash I'll need to close.
Technically, but you will be paying in advance. So I don't want to say no cash outlay, because you do have to pay those people typically to perform the work.
And then I pay myself back out of the
You're
loan.
just paying yourself back. Yeah.
Interesting.
Does that make sense?
I'm not asking about this on the pod enough. Yeah, that's
yeah, it's actually great. And I had the realization while flipping pancakes one morning that the lab is a professional fee. I was like, shit, I should have been saying that like years ago.
Oh,
because
wow.
you can get the lab membership rolled in too. And I just never dawned on me because whatever. Okay. So as a thank you for attending, like Will said, I wanted to give everybody access to the Acquisition Insights course for free. You can go to the link that Will said, because he has a special site set up for acquiring minds that we did for him. Or if it's easier for you, just send an email to bonus@buy-then-build, and it'll auto reply with the discount code and everything that you need.
Amazing, Chelsea. That was, tell us a little bit about the lab.
The lab is
Plug the lab. Don't be shy. Tell us about how great it is.
I wasn't prepared to do that part. Okay, so the lab is designed after the Y Combinator. And so we always say it's like a cohort-based community, but I hate that saying actually. Like what the lab is an advisory service, right? Like you are joining lifetime access to a team of 11 advisors, right? 7 of which are acquisition entrepreneurs that have bought and sold multiple businesses. We have calls every day where you can call and ask questions, but we do require a cohort-based orientation process for all new members, right? And that's the intensive. I feel like I need to reframe it, because everybody keeps thinking they're buying a course when I talk to them, and it's not a course, right? The intensive is designed very specifically. As an industrial organizational psychologist, I know how people think and learn and how they're motivated. And if I don't make you do this work, I don't think it will get done. And it is absolutely foundational to a successful search, which is figuring out who you are, what you should be buying, how to position yourself to the market, understanding the SBA and what it actually means to work with them, and just making sure you know how to get deal flow and analyze deals and evaluate listings and all that stuff, right? And so all of that work, like we do a whole session, I designed a whole session because I can tell our members get in their own way, right? And they're not closing because of the way that our brains process information. And so when you see a deal stall, you can, I can see automatically that it's somebody, the way that we, our stress reactions kind of causing that friction. And so we have a whole workshop now trying to help people understand how to course correct, right, when those things happen, so that they can be more effective in their search. So I know that no one wants to work on the soft stuff. And so those are the sessions that are required. There are 7 workshops that are a hybrid of education from Walker. And then I run a technical workshop, or a live workshop with a technical advisor. And then you move on and you search, and we will support any deal that you do. All of our members want to do multiple deals. And so I did lifetime access because, number one, I realized that if I charged every year, the people that had closed would go away, and we would degrade the value of the lab by losing all the people that have done it. And I didn't want to do that. And then my other thought is like, and I don't want this to sound mean, and I think any lab members that are on the call know I love you, and I don't mean this in a mean way, but like, I didn't want there to be a false sense of security or arrogance once they've done one deal, that they could go and do a second or third or grow through acquisition deal on their own. Every deal is different. And so I wanted to make sure that they knew that we would be there for all of the deals that they wanted to do, because I've been doing deals for a long time at this point, even before the lab, and I still see things I've never seen before. And
Sure.
so, yeah, that's the lab. We've had about 200 closings. Average deal size is about 1 to 10 million. Obviously, we've had some on both sides, outliers. If you're interested in learning more, feel free to visit the Acquisition Lab website. You can read about my bio on that website, as well as all of our advisors, and then schedule a call, and you can talk to
Great.
me, or one of our members started taking calls with me to kind of help people figure out if what they're trying to do is doable.
So let's not gloss over the fact there have been actual 200 or approaching 200 people who have successfully bought a business that are lab
Yeah,
members. That's a very
yeah.
proud, very proud number. 300 million in aggregate transaction value. Acquiring Mind listeners will have heard me talk about those numbers in the sponsorship read, but they should be touted from the rooftops. It's really the a feather in your cap. Chelsea, I'm watching the clock like a hawk here. Lots of questions. Are you able to say publicly how much the lab costs? And is it
Yeah, yeah, it's on our
is there
website.
payment plan options? Tell people about cost.
So the acquisition lab is 8,500 currently. I have to change our price eventually. It's just been a mental hurdle. Like, there are some things I want to do if I'm increasing the cost substantially, like a welcome package with all of our materials printed, but that, whatever. So it's 8,500 right now for lifetime access. There are financing options available. Because the way that we're designed, I have to do an upfront payment, honestly, because it's a lifetime membership. And every cohort supports all the other cohorts. And so we do, people ask about refund policies. I'll give you your money if you're not happy. I've had 5 refunds out of like 800 people, and 3 of them were my own doing. And so I don't think we'll need anybody. I mean, by all means, if you want one, you can have one, but it's not a problem that we've encountered. Most people will pay by business credit card because it's a consulting expense for the acquiring entity that you're using to buy the companies with. But we do have financing available through PayPal that's individualized based on your unique situation.
Is the lab helpful for non-SBA searchers, or is it? I mean, yeah, obviously it can be heavily on Americans, but as I recall, there are definitely people. Anyway, please.
Yes, we have. I guess it depends on what that means. If you're a non-SBA searcher because you don't have any money, and what you mean is that you want to buy a business with no money down, then no, I don't accept those folks into the lab. Because I don't think you should buy a business if you have no money, because they cost money. But if you're asking, does it apply to international folks? I take international folks on a case-by-case basis. We have Canadian members. We've had Canadians buy businesses. That's our largest population that's international. We have a member in Guatemala who started the first PE farm and did the first acquisition in Guatemala. We have members all over the world. I just like to understand what your pain points are and ensure that we could actually address those pain points, because we are not a global M&A firm. And so there will be things we can't do, but as long as you've got that stuff under control, then I'm happy to let those folks in.
Okay, great. Okay, Chelsea, so many questions. Oh, let me also just say, as somebody who went through the lab himself 2.5 years ago, or I think it was 2022, early 2022, when I was still searching, I can vouch for the fact that the lifetime membership. So another year and a half later, there was a business that I was looking at buying, and was able to get in to the to the search forum, which is the live workshop where members come and Walker comes, and you basically workshop the deal live. It's super helpful. Get Walker's insights and then the whole community's insights. It was awesome, and it was an e-commerce business, and one of the advisors is e-commerce focused. Brandon, he's bought a number of e-commerce businesses in his portfolio, so I was able to book a call with Brandon, and have a conversation about this e-commerce opportunity. Again, and that was months, well over a year after I had actually gone through the lab formally. So that lifetime piece and the fact that this is a community that you're buying into is key and is real. How big are the cohorts and how often do you run them? Somebody's asking. We don't
I
want to make
cap,
this is not an infomercial. We'll stop with the lab questions after this. Go ahead.
yeah, I cap them at 23 seats because it gets hard to manage from a time perspective. And I say seats because partners take up a single seat, because I don't charge double. I do charge extra if we have to do work with them, but not a double seat. So 23 typically.
And how often did you say?
Monthly. So they kick off the
Monthly.
first Monday. the first Monday of the month, typically.
Chelsea, say more about the SBA regulation change. We got a few questions in here. What was that? Just give us a little bit more on that, please. Yeah.
Okay, so the SBA regulations changed they've changed. They just love changing. So in November of last year, they came out and said, "Hey, we are willing to let the seller um, put in part of the down payment as long as the seller note is on 2-year standby, and it can count towards the equity." And so that was one big change. The other change was at the time, but I think this has been rolled back. I'd have to go look. Um, I'm not going to say that yet until I can think through if it's got rolled back. So then the second piece was it allowed partial buyouts. So historically, you had to do 100% buyout, whereas now you can do a partial buyout. It has to be a stock sale, so that's a whole nother can of worms. But you can do a partial buyout, meaning that the seller keeps equity. Some people see that as a solution to buying a company and continuing to work. If you think that's a great idea, please get on a call with me and we can talk about what that actually looks like in a day-to-day basis. Again, people can buy businesses however the hell they want, and I'm not here to say it won't work. I'm here to help my members do it in the least risky way possible. But I don't mean to say anything I say is not possible, right? I can guarantee I could reach into our Facebook group and find one person that did it that way and thinks it's wonderful. I just want our members to be set up for success in the best way possible. So I try to mitigate the risks as best as we can. The other change that happened, but I am 99% sure they went back on this. And so, Will, if you've heard this, please tell me. Originally, the seller had to be out of the company in 12 months, and they weren't allowed to be involved in any way after 12 months. Then it changed to key roles. So they could stay, but it couldn't be in a key role. But I believe it rolled back like a month or two ago, and now it's back to they can't be involved after 12 months. Um, so research that one, folks, to see. But I think they just changed it back to they can't be involved at all.
Okay. I was not aware of that. Um, and
Just to be clear, the regulations have always restricted the seller's involvement post close. Always. They're just kind of changing, adding more nuance or taking nuance away, it seems. Same thing with seller notes. Seller notes have always been able to count as equity. It was just always 10-year standby. Now it's 2-year standby, and no balloon payments can be introduced.
Great. Chelsea, some of these logos you have on this slide about acquisitions that members have made are franchises. Is there a franchise orientation to the lab or to searchers overall, would you say? How many people do you feel like buy a franchise? Give whatever your thoughts are on buying an existing franchise business.
So I love franchises for some people, right? They're good for some and not for others. If you're going to do a franchise, though, please hear me say, don't buy a new one. That's just doing a startup, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense when you could buy an existing franchise, right? One that's already cash flowing, one that's established and proven to work. We do have members acquire franchises. If you are somebody that wants control, specifically creative control, a franchise is not for you. If you're someone that is not very comfortable with marketing and sales and operations, then a franchise could be a great way, right, for you to kind of step into ownership and build that comfort level up. There are pros and cons with franchises that you have to decide, right, cost benefit, if you're comfortable with them. We have talks in the lab from franchise consultants that you can go and kind of watch. We have members that have bought franchises. We have advisors that have bought franchises. And so we just deal with it on a case-by-case basis. But franchises are reviewed all the time in the lab. It's just it's right for some people and not for others.
One of your members that's been on Acquire Minds twice, Doug Johns in Portland, bought a Mr. Rooter franchise, a $10 million plumbing business, existing Mr. Rooter franchise. So that's
He's
a
doing
name
quite
people
well.
can Google. Yes, Doug Johns, Acquiring Minds. Google that, people. You mentioned a lot when we were going through all those numbers. Is your target acquisition, Mrs. Searcher, a high cost growth strategy or a low cost growth strategy? How do you decide if it is a high cost or a low cost growth strategy acquisition?
So I love that question because I get a lot of people that will say, well, how much should I allocate for growth? And my answer is always, you shouldn't take a percentage of anything for growth. You should go get estimates on your growth strategies, right? So the difference between the lab and other programs is we focus solely on figuring out who you are and what value you're going to bring to a company, right? Like in order to do this in the least risky way possible, you need to be leveraging your own things that you do really well, right? What have you done exceptionally well in the past that you can now go and replicate in a company? And so in order to figure out what your costs are, figure out what you're going to execute on, and then figure out the cost of doing that. Right. So if you are somebody that has built sales teams, and so many of these businesses have never done sales, then you need to estimate the cost of putting a salesperson in. Right. If you are somebody that is a tech person and you want to go in and execute on tech strategies and put in a CRM and put in, customer communication tools and all these technical platforms, you just need to make sure that you're planning for the execution of the implementation of those tools. And like actually go do the work to figure out how much it's going to cost, right? Like I can't say that enough.
Chelsea, just before you go, and I'd hate to end on a negative note, but can we hear a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of people who have acquired and maybe it's not going well or it's
Yeah.
going terribly or whatever? Yeah, what does it look like out there for those who aren't the success stories?
No, I think that's a beautiful question. It's not negative, right? Reality is not negative. It's just reality. And I think it's really important that folks are going into this eyes wide open, right? Because this has real impact on you and your life and your family and the community and all that jazz. So we have had 2 bankruptcies that I'm aware of. We've had one where the person sold the business at a loss and renegotiated his debt with the SBA, and he's just making payments on it. We have one that I think is about to submit bankruptcy paperwork, and we have one who gave the business back. It was a seller finance deal. The reality is it sucks when the businesses aren't working, right? We have one member actually that's kind of a success, but not. So I'm going to share that as well. We have a member that's doing exceptionally well, like a unicorn business. It's growing tremendously. It's printing cash. They're doing great, but they realize they're miserable. And the reason they're miserable is because it wasn't the right business for them, right? They didn't understand in the moment what environment they needed to be happy in life, right? And what the business needed to contribute aside from economics. And so they're exiting. So it's not bankruptcy, but they are exiting and potentially going to do something else with their life. And so it's not all rainbows and unicorns, right? Like this is a serious fucking deal, and it can have serious impacts. And so it can cause bankruptcy. I will tell you the bankruptcies that we have are all online deals. They were all closed in like June, July of 2022, I think. Anyone listening, if this is you and I'm misspeaking, please let me know. They all bought at 6% interest rates, and those interest rates have doubled, and it is a variable interest rate, so it adjusts every quarter, and so the adjustments all hurt pretty bad. Inflation was a big problem for them because cost of goods increased. Some of them had real struggles with workforces showing up to work and actually wanting to come in. Others got hit pretty hard. Their revenue dropped in half because of the Google algorithm changes with ads. All of them, with the exception of all of them, I guess, were online businesses and one restaurant, which is the only restaurant anybody's ever bought in a lab. So I don't know that I recommend that, but they did try their best to mitigate risk by buying it, established franchises and stuff.
Wow. So not looking good for restaurants. The one restaurant acquisition failed, and then all the other bankruptcies are giving back the business, or it looks like it's going to happen, are digital businesses. So
They were
none
all
of the
online
other
businesses.
are online businesses. So none of the other myriad types of businesses, trades businesses, and otherwise B2B businesses, distribution businesses, white collar businesses. It's all e-commerce. That is such a data point. Wow.
Well, and please hear me when I say that it doesn't mean that there aren't other stories out there. Those are just the people that have come to me and that I've helped through the process. And so
Right.
I don't want it to sound like there's no, and I know of other members who it's not easy, right? Like it's not rainbows and unicorns here. But I don't know of anyone else doing bankruptcy or anything like that other than those stories that I told.
Okay. Okay, Chelsea, and then on just in terms of not about the lab, but using the lab as a proxy for the entire market. 200 acquisitions. of somebody did the math in a question here. It looks like it's about a 25% rate of people who do the lab and then actually buy a business. Does that sound right directionally?
No, it's about, and I only say no because I don't expect my members to close for 8 to 10 months. So
Mm.
this is why I never publish this number. I have to back out anyone that's joined in the last 8 to 10 months. I have to back out partners and spouses. And so when I did the math myself, it was about 35%.
Mm.
But I think it's a little higher than that now. I just haven't done
Wow.
the math lately. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And so would you say of the 65% who don't close, that is there some trend to notice in the people that don't close? They were never serious, or it was too hard to find because searching is competitive, or there's nothing to draw from that. What do you think?
So my biggest aha moment, if I'm honest with lab members, is why you joined. So if you joined not to make a mistake, and this is not data based at all, right? I'm just going off of kind of what my gut says. What I realized was if you joined because you didn't want to make a mistake, then all of the activities that you do in your search are all focused on not making a mistake and not actually focused on buying a business. If you joined for guidance and mentorship and like support in buying a business, then all of your actions are driving towards buying a business. And so with the folks that haven't closed, when I have conversations with them and I'm like, hey, like, why are you frustrated? Where are you in your search? And like, we had a member that was a year in and he's like, I haven't found anything yet. I'm like, oh, okay. How many deals how many LOIs have you submitted? And they said none. Like, well, how in the hell are you going to buy a business if you're not submitting an LOI? But when I asked him what he was doing, he was speaking to sellers. Closers. He was building risk mitigation, models, right? That he was looking at, break even scenarios. And like, he was just doing so much analysis and so much. I mean, I think he talked to like 35 of our closers. Haven't even called 35 of our closers. I leave them alone, unless I really need something. And so like, all of the effort was going towards trying not to make a mistake, and actually no efforts were going towards the activities required to actually close on a business. And so I think that there's just a, why are you joining? If you don't want to make a mistake, I don't know that you're ever going to be comfortable, right? Like you could spend $1 million on due diligence on $1 million purchase price and still not be comfortable. And if you are 100% comfortable, you're not being realistic, right? So like at the end of the day, there's a leap of faith that you have to be willing to take in yourself, that no matter what happens, you'll figure it out. If that's not you, then you probably won't close. The other challenge is deal flow. Like I do not want to undermine the challenge that is getting deals. It is a tedious process. It is getting harder because there's so many people now like repping deals, quote unquote. So yeah, I'd say that's my initial reaction.
Okay, that was great. People who are analysis paralysis, or they just don't, they're not going to quite get there because of personality or what have you, and then or just finding a deal, which of course is, we all know that that's the name of the game and the hard part. Chelsea, what do you think about ROBS,
Um,
and define it for us, please?
so Rob's is a rollover benefit for
Business startup,
startups.
I
There
think.
you go. And so it can also be used to fund a deal. I tell all lab members, if you're considering Rob's, to talk to Paul Cook at Guidant Financial because I feel like he's the most transparent about what Rob's actually means. I think it's fine, again, like franchise. I think it's fine for some people and not for others. I think you need to be 100% aware of what you're getting into when you use Rob's. There are things I learned from a conversation with Paul, that I wasn't aware of that are big deals, right? Like most people don't understand the impact of using Rob's. I'm not a Rob's expert, which is why I don't want to speak to it. But the biggest thing is that the Rob's owns the business if you're using it for the majority of your, any portion of your down payment. But let's say you're using it for 100%, then it owns the business. And that can be pretty impactful on how you leverage the cash flow, and just in general, right? And so just be very aware. We've had members use Rob's and they're very passionate about talking about it with people. So if you want to use it, all for it, but go eyes wide open. Talk to Paul, talk to people that have used it. Doug Johns is one person that,
Yep.
if I remember correctly, that likes to talk about it. We have a handful of other members that also used it that like to talk about it. So take that for what it's worth.
I don't think we either of us said that ROBS it's the name of the program, the acronym for a way to tap your 401k. Money's
Oh,
in your
correct.
401k. So if you're
Correct.
not very liquid, but you have a chunk of money in your 401k, how you can access that for your equity injection without a giant penalty. But it is
Correct.
very bureaucratic. And like Chelsea said, some percentage of the business that you acquire or all of it then is owned by your 401k. You can later undo that or buy the business back out from your 401k, which is what Doug Johns did. But
Yeah.
this is why Guidance, this company that Chelsea referenced, Guidance exists. This is meticulous government, highly regulated stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not being very articulate. So doing it is, there's a lot of paperwork and being careful to do it. So you're not gonna do it on your own. You're probably gonna pay Guidance to do it. Doug
Yes.
Johns on Acquiring Minds, guys, Google that. He was on Acquiring Minds twice. In his second interview, he talks about how he bought his business back out of the Robs. Sorry, Chelsea.
No. The important thing to recognize, because you are buying it with the 401k and it is owned by the 401k, this is another piece I didn't know, was that you have to offer the 401k to your employees. And so it just gets messy. And so just go in informed. Informed. It's not a bad strategy. It's if you're informed.
You sounded fairly resistant to hiring an operator to run the business. And you've now referred to it a number of times. Was that a general statement, or was that just in the first year or so? Is your resistance like, oh, I'm going to keep my W-2 and hire an operator to run the business that I buy? Or is that, what if somebody envisions getting into their business for a couple of years and then hiring an operator?
Yeah, I think everyone should hire an operator. Let me be clear. When the time is right. Right? The challenge that I have is that, number one, a lot of people have this idea, and it's been glamorized on social media, and it makes me want to, most days, is that I don't think anyone should go buy a company and hire someone on LinkedIn to run that company for them. I think that is a massive mistake. And anyone recommending to hire an operator that you don't know has never hired people, right? Anyone that's done hiring knows what a tremendous hardship it can be. And I don't know how you would even hire someone without knowing the business and knowing what you're looking for and the characteristics of it. And people will say, because I'll have these calls with applicants and I'm not interested in that model, will say, well, they've got 30 years industry knowledge. Great, fantastic. But you don't know anything about how they view operations or how they lead or any skills that they have that could make them critical as an operator, but you don't know because you don't know the business. So you're inherently building in a tremendous amount of risk because you're buying a company you know nothing about. You're not going to learn operations. You're carrying a note. You're going to be going and doing a W-2. What of that sounds like a great plan? I don't know. I realize that I sound biased, I guess, but I'm an IO psychologist who's done cleanup so much that I can tell you it's not going to be pretty in most situations. If you have an operator in mind, you have somebody you've worked with, you trust them, that's a different story, right? Then you buy a business for them, right? You come in as partners, you find a business that's right for the skills that they bring to the table, and you're hands off, you trust them, that's great. Love that. That's what Walker does. Hi, I'm the operator. He asked me to build a lab because this is how he operates. I think the safer way to do it, and this is specifically when you're using debt, right? I'm always talking about it in the framework of most people use debt that is personally guaranteed with substantial risk. And so why stack risk, right? Most people have the goal of getting out of the business. When I say out, working on typically growing the business within 6 to 18 months. That to me is healthy, right? I think everyone should replace themselves if you're doing the day-to-day job just from a growth of the business perspective, right? Most of our members are going to want to replace themselves, at least 18 to 3 years in, right? So that they can go do something different. Growth through acquisition typically happens within that 18 to 2 year mark, right? And so I think that's 100% safe. By then, you know the business, you know what you would be looking for to hire someone. But I once had somebody tell me they were going to hire an operator to run the business. And when I said, well, who's going to train the operator? They said the seller. So time out. You're going to have the seller train your operator at closing. Can you imagine the power that this person now carries when you know nothing? So they're going to train you? It just sounds like such a mess. And I don't know why anyone would do it. Can you do it? Sure. All day long. Have fun. Do I think it's the smartest move? No, I don't. Does that answer your question, Mo?
Fantastic, Chelsea.
I'm very passionate about this topic.
No, that's awesome. I think that was really great for people to hear. All right, Chelsea, thank you so much for doing this. Period.
Thank you for sending me your questions and giving me a chance to support you. I love supporting searchers. I was just telling the members in Slack how blessed I feel that I get to have a part in so many lives. It's amazing.